So, in 1818, Mary Shelley wrote a novel where she introduced scientist Dr. Victor Frankenstein, who collected random body parts, sewed them together, jolted this creature to life, and needless to say, problems ensue. I frequently think of this story when I encounter what I like to call a Frankensite. Now, to be clear, a Frankensite is not a website about Frankenstein. By the way, this website was designed by AI. It's usually not created either from intentionally. It usually evolves over time. Most websites are architected properly when they start. And what happens is over time, they turn into Frankensites. How does this happen? First of all, if originally they started with a very design-specific architecture, where every single spot on the design had a property, and then someone comes along and says, actually, we want to kind of move this over here, and we want to move this over here, and then suddenly more properties get added, and things get renamed, but not really renamed in the back office. So what used to be top content is now actually sidebar content. Another thing that happens, very high impact, like work cycles. People have to work fast, 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 all the time. New features, new content, new features, new content. You get new developers on board, they don't have time to look at the existing code base. And they say, just build it. And they say, okay, we'll just stick it over here. That'll work. And also problems of the site that, once again, usually due to emergency resourcing problems, don't get properly fixed. So if your site's running slow, instead of digging into it, figuring out where's the bottleneck, what's really going on, they say, just put another caching layer on. That'll fix it. And then, of course, later on, that caching layer is part of new problems. Additional problems with your Frankensites. Editors get really upset after enough years working on one of these sites. There are extra properties all over the place that aren't actually being used, and they clutter up the UI, and they're confusing to them. They're unclear about actually how to change the things they do want to change on the live site. They don't know what properties are controlling what anymore, partly due to all those extra properties that are in there. Also, there can be a lot of required properties that are not actually required anymore, and they get confused because they're not sure what to put in that slot now. Maybe at one point, it was like you had to pick a related blog post. And the new design doesn't require a related blog post, but they still have to pick related blog posts just to get the content node to save. Another thing that can happen is sometimes you end up with duplicated editing efforts. So a project that I worked on recently, they had a people node that they put underneath certain pages to represent team members. But then you notice, well, what happens when now they have another team and the same person is on both teams? Now they have two people nodes. How do you keep those synced? What if their title changes? What if their bio gets updated? What if they have a new headshot? Did you remember to update both of them? Probably not. It's also very confusing for developers, particularly developers that are new to the team and do not have the legacy understanding of why we did this weird thing 2 years ago because it was to fix this other thing that was done 3 years ago, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And similar to property editors, you have other stuff that's just all over and unused. Lots of extra doc types, code files, who knows what. And it's all just in there. And people are afraid to touch it or delete it because it might blow something up. You know, they're very afraid of deleting things or moving things, you know, because they don't know what's going to happen. And so they just say, well, we'll just add something over here instead of changing the existing thing. And now you've got two of something. And it's really hard to fix bugs because the code base is all over. They're not really sure where this thing is actually getting called from because it's also calling this other thing, and maybe this is the problem, not this thing. Also, just technologically, it's inefficient. Your front end might be running slowly because people keep stuffing extra random JavaScripts into new template designs or like dropping inline style blocks all over the place. You know, anytime they're like, oh, now we need this new section. let's just like add a little extra CSS just for this page. And you've got things being pulled in all over. You maybe even have like, JavaScript files being pulled in multiple times because 3 templates are calling it, whatever. Also, you've got server resources. They're storing all these extra files. They're compiling and deploying all these extra files. And finally, human time, the most important time, is being wasted. Because you've got your editors, your developers, your QA people, everybody has more muck to wade through on a daily basis. This all results in the general feeling of doom. Because your site is fragile, finicky, frustrating. Come up with some more F words for me, people. It's just, everyone's afraid to do anything with it. So what's the solution for a Franken site? You need to have a cleanup project. I personally am a big fan of cleanup projects. A lot of people don't like them, but I'm nerdy enough that I just love tidying things up. There are challenges, though. If you want to have a cleanup project, you have to usually get some kind of big approval for it. And the problem with a cleanup project is most of the mess is not visible on the front of the site. So corporate types that only look at the front of the website, they said it looks fine. It's everybody who has to actually work with the website that notices the mess. The ones who are opening up the back office, the developers, the QA people. You do need time and dedicated resources to do a cleanup project, so you have to get buy-in from the people that are actually going to approve that time and money. It needs to be done separate from whatever daily content updates or functional updates you're usually doing. And it might not have a visible difference that's obvious to those who are not directly working with the site at the end. A lot of times, a cleanup project, no matter how many people in the team say it's absolutely necessary and will dramatically improve the website, will not be approved because at the end of the day, we still have the same site, according to certain people. So here's a solution. Use an upgrade. So if you've got a major version upgrade, you can kind of justify it easier, particularly to the corporate ones, that, it's a big project, it's an upgrade. We have to do this, And it's also another justification to set up a completely separate environment to do this project, which is a really good idea, even if you're not technically upgrading, because you're gonna make a mess by moving things around and potentially deleting things, and you're gonna have to rejigger your certain bits of code. And it's gonna look like a mess at certain points. You do not wanna do this on your live site, people. I don't have to tell you people this, but there are others who have tried to clean things up on a live site. And maybe you will get your visual refresh if it's been several years. It isn't a terrible idea to wrap in a visual redesign at this point. Partly because of the previous options, it's easier to justify the big bucks for this project and a lot of team resources dedicated to it. And this will make the corporate people feel like, look, it's shiny and new. Also, because you have to make a mess anyway, and because you probably are going to be touching a lot of your code files and your templates, okay, you're going to have to do that with a redesign. So sometimes as long as you've got the time for it, combining those sort of projects together can be a win. And then you got to sell it, of course. So more stability. The site will not be running so slow. It will not be crashing as much, you can say to people. You're going to save time. Your staff time is valuable. And if future, development and editing takes less time, that's money. Hey, all that cool new stuff you want implemented? Faster, easier, smoother, nicer. So yay, you got approval. So now we get to plan it. It's going to take longer than you think. Take the number of pages, number of, not content nodes, but page types you've got, so templates or doc types. And take that approximately times the number of years the site has been up and functional, times a vague number indicating its general complexity. Is this a basic brochureware, or is this pulling in 6 APIs, And you're going to get to kind of an estimate that way. Additionally, if you are adding a redesign project, make it times 3. And also with the redesign, if you are doing a visual redesign, get that entire design portion done before you do this. Go through all of the UX, UI things that people want to do, because all these people are going to want to have their input, and you're going to go back and forth with the design. You might think it's a simple homepage refresh. It'll only take a month, says the designer. And then you get like 10 people in the room who all have an opinion about the shade blue that's being chosen, and it's going to take 3 months. So get that all done. Get yourself down to like, we even have the front end code like ready to go before you get started here. Try to do a development pause on your live site. This is going to give you more resources for this project, and also it's going to keep you from having to then reintegrate all of the new stuff you just built for the current live site. This is going to save you a lot of stress later on. It's nice to just say, okay, everyone just take a time out. We're going to do this, and we'll get back on track with new stuff, and it'll be even better. You can plan for this ahead of time. Just talk to the stakeholders and say, hey guys, is there anything for like the next 6 months you're thinking you want to have on this site? And if so, just try to like get that done now, even if it's not live. Just get it, staged. Because then you will at least have that functionality and that code in your code base when you're doing the cleanup. Similarly, as much as possible, try to do sort of a big content freeze. There's going to be certain content that is going to have to be continually added. Maybe they're always posting a blog post every other day, or new press releases come out weekly, or whatever. But since you're probably going to be taking a copy of this database and doing your work there, you're not going to be able to go back and forth very easily. So at least tell the content team, look, if you've got any big like new product launches, try to pre-build the content in the system before we take our database cut. Just unpublish it, leave it hanging out, and then you just click go when it's time. Also, because anything that they add after this moment, they're going to need to track it somehow. So they're going to probably be opening up a Word doc and saying, oh, we added this blog post, we changed the phone number, blah, blah, blah. So the less content that they can be doing during this period of time, just the easier, because someone's going to have to go back into the new site and redo all that content there. And finally, if you're doing your upgrade with like a major version upgrade your database, and then only copy over the code files as needed. Like you're probably going to have to put like all the views over, just because Umbraco will get upset if there's no view files for all of its templates. But all those extra CS files and every extra piece of code, leave it in like, your secondary file system, start fresh, and just move the things over as you come across the need for them. This is going to immediately clean out a lot of old cruft. If there's a lot of like CSS or code files that have not actually been called anywhere, they're just going to get left behind. They won't get copied over. So what is the cleanup process like? This is obviously going to be extremely unique to your project, but we've got some easy, low-hanging fruit, as they say, high-level things we can do. So the first obvious thing is look for stuff that's not in use any longer. Years ago, I created a tool, which you're all welcome to go and install, because I wanted to be able to see information about my Umbraco schema in like table format, and like even export it to Excel and filter it and blah, blah, blah. So I created a tool for this, and it has a bunch of different options, but like a really obvious one, templates. A lot of sites have too many templates because they did like homepage version 3, homepage version 5, homepage version 10, and so they've got these extra files floating around. And so you can get a report of exactly how many content nodes are, being used by a template, and which ones actually aren't being used. And those are sometimes an easy thing to quickly clean up. Similarly, document types. Sometimes you build a section and later you trash it, and those document types are now obsolete. You can see how many content nodes are actually being used for each doc type, and then get rid of those things. And by the way, particularly if you're using something like Umbraco Cloud will not delete things on forward environments. If you deploy, you can't really deploy deletions of objects. You can deploy deletions of properties, but like it will not delete like templates or document types by default. So what I usually do if I'm deleting something is I put a double X in front of its name and its alias and save it. And that drops them to the bottom of the pile, and when you do your deployment, those name changes will get deployed. And then you can actually very quickly go into your forward environments and actually delete everything with the X's in front of it. And data types, of course. Umbraco comes with a handful of standard data types included, but everybody customizes their data types, and sometimes you end up with too many. Speaking of data types, there was one version, and I cannot remember, maybe Erica remembers, I cannot remember exactly which version it was, but there was a change in the UI of when you would be able to add properties to a new document type or editing a document type. And it was not by default pointing you to existing data types. By default, it was like showing you the list of the new, like the make me a new data type thing. And so there are some sites that I've inherited that have hundreds of unnecessary data types because people just thought that's what I have to do. I have to just create new data types for every single property. And it's really not necessary. So also, I don't love the default naming scheme for data types because it's like this: content type name, property editor name. And so you end up with stuff like this, homepage top right blurb, text box. And this is also like, you can tell when someone had one of those sites that was, prompting them to create new data types all over the place because you've got all of these like data types and they're all sorted by document type name. This is the way that I rename all the data types in any website I get. Property editor name, because that's the important part, and then something about why this is unique. Like, most text box properties just can use text string. You do not need to customize them. If you need a custom one, because it needs to be only 200 characters or something, create something that says text string -200 char. It will be very clear to people when you want to use this and why. So these are like examples of names that I've used. Media picker, single image. Because then next time you create another property that requires a single image, oh, we use that one. Or multi-node tree picker, products. That's pretty clear, and you can reuse that. You're going to clean up a lot of data types just by going through that because you're going to find like, oh, this is not configured differently at all. This is not configured differently at all. This is not configured differently at all. And similarly, if you're using cloud, put little X's and push the changes, and then you can delete them. Other areas that are easy to find, don't repeat yourself, obviously. So, if you've got, like, for instance, those people nodes that are in multiple spots, try to bring those together, put them in one place, and then just change that. Instead of using children nodes, put a picker on it, and then people can select out of a single store of people. Anything that is a numbered property kills me. If it says something like featured article 1, featured article 2, featured article 3, quote 1, quote 2, quote 3, quote 4, I want to tear my hair out. If you want to limit the quantity of things being selected on a page, you can do that inside a customized data type. The great thing about a customized data type is that if that changes, which it will at some point, you just have to update your rules on that data type. And now you can select only one blog post or 12 blog posts or whatever. It's really annoying also to program against numbered properties. If blog post 1 is not null, render out blog post 1. If blog post 2 is not null, So those can usually be replaced with a single multi-property, whether that's a multi-node tree picker, whether that's a repeatable text string, whether that's something like a block list, whatever. Be creative. Also, anytime you see something named with a vaguely design-oriented name, take a close look at that and decide if that's necessary. So top right content, bottom left blurb. You can tell that somebody literally took their design and they just drew little boxes around all the content and made a property for each one, and they're all RTEs. So as much as possible, try to get away from that. And I just heard about this yesterday, so I had to like tack this on, and I don't have a lot of information, but if you're using Deploy, Ronald had a great talk about their new migrations tool, where you can export your data and import it, but you can like run some magic on it first. And you can re-import things into the same site. So if you've got something like where you want to convert a property type or something like that, you can do that and you see it and you're like, oh, that didn't quite work. Let's just do it again. Let's do it again. And that's a good way to maybe do some of the more complicated cleanup so you don't have to be doing manual copy-paste between new property types. Also, legacy properties. These are the ones that are no longer used or no longer important. Generally, I keep them present because just for reference, and also because sometimes a content editor might get confused otherwise, but you label them. Legacy, very big, so that they realize this is not probably going to get rendered, and also I shouldn't bother updating this in any way, shape, or form. And if you've like switched from saying promo 1, promo 2, promo 3 to a block list, try to put all of those properties near each other. And your old ones are labeled legacy, but they're right next to the new one. So people can see, oh, okay, this is what we used to have, and now we just need to put that information in this area now. Just as like a little bit of a trigger clue for them. Or you can move them to the bottom in its own legacy group and just keep them there for reference. And also, particularly if you move them somewhere else, put a little description text that guides them to where they should now edit. This is just going to help them be reoriented to the new, better way of doing things, you know? Oh, no, don't put a promo here. Go back up to, featured promos and add it there. And finally, this is a really easy thing to do as a developer. Use smart fallbacks in your view files. So if you've added a new type of property that replaces other properties, put it in your view that says, if the new property is full, use it. If not, kind of do it the old way. This is particularly important if you have a big site that has a lot of pages of like sort of a lot of content pages, and that your content editors do not have time to go in and like update all this stuff. And so this allows that to like the page will render, it'll show it the old way, and as those content editors have time or as those pages are getting naturally rewritten, they end up getting updated to the new way. This could also be a time to rethink your front-end organization, and this is going to help a lot in terms of your site speed, load time, things like that. So it might be time to put a preprocessor in place for your CSS. Sometimes, particularly on sites that were designed and sort of delivered by a designer, you just get a CSS file, and that's what you're stuck with. And so over time, new developers come and go, and they're like, well, we'll just add another CSS file to like handle this new blog area, or like we'll kind of like, we don't really know, we don't want to break the CSS, we'll just add this extra little bit just on this one template to override it. And it might be time to break that file out into a more logical breakdown, try to like look for duplicated stuff, and really just try to come into the 21st century of web development here. Also, if you're doing a front-end visual redesign, it might be time to think about your framework. And, are we on Bootstrap 3? Maybe it's time for an upgrade. So, additionally, we're going to go through all of your templates. And just work through them section by section just because it's easiest to sort of eyeball the QA on this. Start a blog listing, get that cleaned up, and then just click through a few blog posts, make sure they're rendering correctly. If you're coming across huge chunks of complex logic code in your templates, those should be moved out. I've seen projects where they're pulling in data feeds directly in the view file, which means it's running every time the page is loaded, or calling SQL from an external database every time the page is loaded. There are probably better ways to handle that, guys. So this is a time to pull all that out and put it someplace that makes more sense. Once you come across all those little globs of random CSS, move them into the SAS system that you've now built. And, You can just do a sort of a quick and dirty by using the find code issues on the views folder, and it'll pull up things like compiler, warnings and errors, and that's a quick way to kind of catch a bunch of little things. And also make sure that like when you changed all those document types, your models are still working. And of course, QA is essential to this process because we've mucked around quite a bit. But because we're doing this in a separate project, there will be resources available for a thorough QA. This is another sort of one of those quick and dirty things where even if you don't care about full text search on your site, if you install this package, it will visit every node of your site via HTTP. So it will look at it as if it were a human, like on the front end. And so if you get an exception, that exception then will be in your error log. So then all you got to do, you got to run this. It's going to look it across all the site pages. You open up your error log and you look for errors and warnings. And that's a quick way to grab like, oh, this extremely deeply nested, obscure page like had an error because it had a macro on it that we didn't fix. And of course, in the age of AI, have some real humans click around and look at everything, make sure things are rendering correctly. Now, once you've got this beautiful, cleaned up new site, let's not muck it up again anytime soon. So a couple things. As much as possible, make sure properties that you're adding have a meaning, like a semantic, qualitative meaning that is not related to a design aspect as much as possible. So yes, maybe it is featured blog post or, featured product. That's fine. That has meaning. We understand what that is. No matter how that's rendered on a page, we know what the purpose of that is. If you've got a lot of, kind of free-form pages that have different designs, instead of having 25 separate templates with 100 properties on each one, try to just have like 1 or 2 templates that cover the biggest general use cases and use things like blocks for the customized on-page content. And once again, think about separating your content and your design as much as possible. A lot of RTE fields should not be filled with custom classes because once you change over a design, suddenly your code is still littered with classes that no longer make sense or add value. And another sort of little quick tip is, since macros are going the way of the dinosaurs, even if you're still utilizing them in a current site, you're not moving to 14 anytime soon, you do want to be thinking ahead. And so just drop a little bit of logging code in the top of all of your macro partials that just basically says, hey, macro XYZ was used on page ABC, node ID 123. And then give it like a warning or something. And then every once in a while, you can just pop into Umbraco log and you can actually see where macros are actually getting rendered out. Because sometimes they're not in templates, sometimes they're in RTEs, and unless you're clicking on every single content node, you're not gonna find them all. And then if you decided that we were gonna delete macros, now that page suddenly blows up. Finally, do not allow perfectionism to block progress. Here. It's going to be very hard to get this to a state where very OCD developers are going to feel peaceful at night. But any amount of work you do in this direction is going to pay dividends going forward. Technical debt always has to be paid eventually. And if you can pay it in installment plans, that's just as good. So that's my talk. If you're curious about some of the things that I talked about, like the links to packages and things like that, you can find them here. Once there's a video available, I'll put it there. And that's me.
Heather Floyd, everyone.